Welcome back to Teaching World History using the World History Workbook. One of my old professors, one of my favorite professors from the University of Oregon, where I got my PhD, was Stan Pearson. And Stan used to tell his students that part of the job of a historian is to complicate history for students. And of course that's true, that history is much more complicated than the often simplified narrative that students often bring with them from high school or even from other undergraduate courses or from popular culture. And historians are aware of that. But with this material on modernization, this is chapter 7, pages 141 through 151, I kind of think it's my job to simplify it, because it's important to make these stories accessible, not to simply require that students memorize complicated structures and causality and things like that, which are all important. But I think that students need a basic entry into those more complicated stories, and that's what I've done for this GE class with this theme of modernization. I've said the modern world, which I really date from, I don't date it, it's very conventional dating, from the French Revolution onwards, has three essential driving forces are nationalism, capitalism, and industrialism. Those are all terms that are already in most people's vocabularies. But in this chapter, I think that it's important to define them, and so we have an agreed definition. We need an agreed definition to discuss these terms. The definitions are not controversial that I offer. Capitalism is it's an economic system with three basic elements: a tendency towards a free market, protection of private property, and profit-centered economy. That's fairly standard. Then dig deeper and look at the moral consequences, the social consequences, the cultural consequences of capitalism. And once that definition is established and people can agree on what that means, a tendency towards a free market, then people are then empowered to have a more sophisticated discussion about the implications of it, about where does one freedom end and the other begin, and all of those questions that come with the implementation and perpetuation of capitalism. Nationalism is a little bit less humanist than the other two. Industrialism and capitalism clearly come out of the humanist tradition. Nationalism doesn't so much. Nationalism is more a statement of a human requiring a community and establishing a tribe and an identity outside of the individual, beyond the individual. Nationalism does recognize a number of realities. One of them is that humans are social and gregarious creatures. Another is that there needs to be some organization of protection for the individual's rights. And that's the function of government. It's the function of modern national states when they are democratic. The third one, industrialization, is the definition is provided. It's a very conventional definition, and it's obvious to see, and it's no surprise to any student or anybody living in the world today, that industrialism brought incredible advances in agriculture and life expectancy and medicine and travel and communication and all of the things that have become the internet. All of those are also products of the scientific revolution and industrialization. But it also, industrialization also brought with it a lot of bad things. I mean, there's a 300-mile wide plastic pool in the Pacific Ocean. And there's more than that. There's air pollution, there's atomic bombs, there's all kinds of things that industrialism brought with it that one may not think of as positive. Not to mention just the stress of modern life, the chaos of modern life, the loss of traditional communities, horrible working conditions in particularly early industrializing countries. And that's also a function of and a feature of capitalism. So Modernization chapter goes through these three developments very briefly. Again, it's the tip, but it's an opportunity for students and their instructors to have these discussions about the value and the meaning and the application of these important developments. Developments which changed the world enormously. And the world has changed so much in the last 200 years that it's greater than in the previous 2,000 years in many respects. So I think that it's important that students have a little perspective on that and appreciate and recognize not only that these developments are humanist, but that these developments are radical in human history. Modernization is it's a set of changes that changed people's lives more than they had been changed ever before. But here on page 146 and 147, there's this excerpt from the Human Rights Watch, United Nations Human Rights Watch, describing conditions for children working in an industrial economy in India. But this could have been an excerpt from many places and many countries and many times. Project 29 on page 149 asks questions about industrial conditions, and I think it's important to remember that these are not only features of industrialism, but they're features of industrial capitalism or capitalistic industrialism. And they're not conditions that are very surprising to people, but they need to be addressed. The first question identifies specific examples of the negative impact of industrialization as shown in Industrial Manchester. Industrial Manchester it's a good read, and there's just a couple of pages excerpted in the back, selected in the back in Appendix 17, and students can easily compare that to those conditions to the conditions of the shoe factory in India. Question 2, how do two women miners in industrial Manchester show destruction of traditional communities? By traditional communities, modern historians usually mean the village and the family, or the extended family. And industrialism and capitalism really changed those radically. The traditional village life in India, as well as traditional village life in Japan and in Europe. They weren't completely destroyed, but they were altered forever as people migrated to cities and cash economies replaced traditional economies, and families didn't have the same networks, they didn't have the same support network as in cities as they had in villages. Number 3, how do the readings on women miners confirm some of the moral complaints against capitalism and the need for regulation of capitalist industry? One story that I think has been lost for the most part about the rise of capitalism and the implementation of capitalist economies in Europe is that there were many Christian churches opposed capitalism on the basis that the capitalism is inherently greedy. Christian churches actually had periodic alliances with socialist groups in Europe and with union organizations in the United States, although maybe to a lesser degree, in opposition to capitalism, because capitalism produced conditions that not only opposed the household and the family and the traditional community, but were also grossly violating human rights. So I think that these testimonies from British Parliament from the 19th century demonstrate that very clearly. And clearly there can be little question that capitalism needs to be regulated, that working days need to be regulated, that sick leave needs to be regulated, that workman's comp needs to be regulated, those kinds of issues, which did not come automatically, because there were those proponents of the free market who said the free market should never be regulated. Wages will work their way out, work their way through. that the market will eventually adjust to abuses. The problem is, in the meantime, there's abuses, and it's pretty clear that in many cases the market, it takes so long that it never becomes clear whether or not the market will adjust to abuses. The market didn't naturally adjust to the abuse of slavery, which was an economic condition, although not exactly capitalistic. Project 30, how did industrialism reduce time and space? I think this is a great question, and it's a great way to think of industrialism. Did it reduce time and space to the degree that today we can buy something manufactured in China and it can show up on our doorstep the next day, and we can do all of this with the push of a button? It's that's an incredible development. And the question is, are these positive developments? And I think the answer is going to be simply they're positive and negative. They have both aspects. Question 2 is an interesting question. It's designed for the student to look at the impact of industrialism and capitalism in the student's own life and own environment, about handmade things. Next we'll go on to globalization, chapter 8. Thank you.